In the quiet hum of a forgotten observatory, Dr. Elara Voss stared at the flickering screen, her breath catching in her throat. The signal was faint but unmistakable, a pulse of data from a planet that shouldn't exist. A planet that vanished centuries ago, leaving behind nothing but myths and unanswered questions. For Ellara, this wasn't just a scientific anomaly, it was a chance at redemption. Once celebrated as one of the brightest minds in astrophysics, her fall from grace had been swift and brutal. Now, with this encrypted signal in her hands, she saw a way to reclaim everything she'd lost. But as she began assembling a crew of misfits and outcasts, each with their own secrets to hide, whispers of sabotage crept into the corners of her mind. The signal wasn't just a call from the past, it was a warning, and as the countdown to launch began, Ellara couldn't shake the feeling that the real danger wasn't in the void of space, but in the shadows closing in around her. The Ethereal groaned as its aged thrusters ignited, the vibrations rattling through the ship's skeletal frame like a dying beast stirring to life. Ellara gripped the edge of her console, her knuckles white, as the crew strapped in. Jax, the ship's engineer, muttered curses under his breath, his fingers flying across a cracked control panel. A warning light blinked red, and the ship's AI voice, crackling with static, announced a critical failure in the fuel injection system. Jax shot Ellara a glare that could melt steel. This is what happens when you rush a launch with a ship that hasn't seen a proper overhaul in decades, he snapped, his voice sharp with accusation. Ellara didn't respond. She couldn't. The memory of Jax's brother, lost in the debris of her last mission, hung between them like a ghost. She knew Jax blamed her, and maybe he was right. But now wasn't the time for regrets. The Ethereal was already breaking free of Earth's gravity, and there was no turning back. Jax slammed a wrench into the malfunctioning panel, sparks flying as he bypassed the system manually. The ship lurched, and for a heart-stopping moment, it felt like they might not make it. Then, with a shuddering roar, the Ethereal surged forward, leaving the blue curve of Earth far behind. The stars spread out before them, infinite and cold. Ellara exhaled, but the relief was fleeting. The fuel gauge blinked ominously, showing they were already running on fumes. One wrong move, one miscalculation, and they'd be adrift in the void with no hope of rescue. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on her shoulders. She wasn't just chasing a signal and a more. She was carrying the lives of everyone on board, each with their own scars and secrets. And as the Ethereal drifted deeper into the unknown, Ellara couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows trailing them weren't just in her mind. Something or someone was watching. The coordinates for the vanished planet blinked on the navigation console, a set of numbers that felt more like a riddle than a destination. Ellara double-checked the calculations, her fingers trembling slightly as she input the data. The Ethereal systems whirred to life, but almost immediately, the screens flickered. Strange symbols and impossible readings flooded the display. A planet that shouldn't exist, coordinates that defied logic. Pilot Kira leaned over the console, her sharp eyes narrowing as she studied the chaos. "This isn't just a glitch," she muttered, her voice low. "The system's trying to tell us something, or maybe it's being told a lie." Kira, a former smuggler with a reputation for slipping through the tightest cracks in the galaxy, had a sixth sense for danger. She suggested a detour, an uncharted nebula that could shave days off their journey. "It's a gamble," she admitted, her tone uncharacteristically cautious. "But if we stick to the original route, we'll burn through what little fuel we have before we even get close." Ellara hesitated, her mind racing, trusting Kira's instincts had saved them before, but this nebula was a complete unknown. Still, with the navigation system sputtering and time running out, she had no choice but to agree. As the Ethereal entered the nebula, the ship was enveloped in a swirling haze of violet and gold. The light was hypnotic, almost alive, pulsing with an otherworldly rhythm. At first, the crew marveled at the beauty of it, but soon, the effects became impossible to ignore. A strange, sleep-inducing radiation seeped through the ship's shields, wrapping around the crew like a heavy fog. One by one, they began to drift into a waking dream, their minds unraveling under the nebula's influence. Elara was the first to succumb. Visions of her past failures played out before her like a cruel montage, her once brilliant career crumbling. The faces of those she'd let down staring back at her with silent accusation. Across the ship, Jax was trapped in his own nightmare. His brother's ghost appeared, not as the man he remembered, but as a twisted specter, its hollow eyes filled with blame. "You left me," the ghost whispered, its voice echoing in Jax's mind. "You let her take me." The hallucinations spread like a virus, feeding on the crew's deepest fears and regrets. Kira, usually so unshakable, found herself reliving the moment she'd been betrayed by the people she trusted most. Paranoia crept in, poisoning the air. Whispers of sabotage and betrayal filled the corridors, and the fragile unity of the crew began to fracture. Even the ship's AI seemed affected, its voice growing erratic, its warnings laced with cryptic riddles. Elara fought to stay focused, her hands gripping the edge of the console as she tried to anchor herself in reality. The decision loomed over her like a storm cloud: push forward into the unknown or turn back and abandon the mission. The weight of it pressed down on her chest, each breath a struggle. She glanced at the crew, their faces pale and haunted, and knew that whatever she chose, the consequences would be irreversible. The nebula wasn't just testing their resolve, it was tearing them apart from the inside. And somewhere, in the depths of that swirling haze, the signal from the vanished planet pulsed like a heartbeat, waiting. The Ethereal shuddered as it broke free from the nebula's grasp, the crew blinking back to awareness like swimmers surfacing from deep water. Ahead, against the endless black of space, a derelict space station loomed, a skeletal relic orbiting the coordinates of the vanished planet. Its hull was scarred and pitted, the faint glow of its remaining power flickering like a dying ember. For a moment, the crew simply stared, the weight of what they just endured still clinging to them. But there was no time to process. The station was their only lead, and it was already falling apart. Elara and Jax suited up, their movements stiff with tension, as they prepared to board the station. The airlock hissed open, revealing a corridor littered with debris and frozen in time. The walls were lined with scorch marks, and the faint hum of failing systems echoed through the emptiness. Jax's voice crackled over the comms, his tone clipped but steady. This place is a graveyard. Whatever happened here, it wasn't pretty. As they moved deeper into the station, the logs began to tell a story. The station had been part of a secret government project, codenamed Eclipse, tasked with studying the planet's sudden disappearance. The logs were fragmented, but one thing was clear: the project had been abandoned in haste. The final entries spoke of an experiment gone catastrophically wrong, of a device designed to manipulate the fabric of reality itself. Elara's breath caught as she pieced it together. This wasn't just about a vanished planet. It was about something far more dangerous. In the heart of the station, they found the device. It was massive, its surface etched with strange symbols that seemed to shift under the light. Energy crackled around it, unstable and erratic, like a storm trapped in a cage. Jax stepped closer, his gloved hand hovering over the controls. This thing, it's still active. If we could just know. Ellara cut him off, her voice sharp. It's too unstable. One wrong move and we could tear a hole in reality. But as she spoke, the station groaned around them, the floor trembling beneath their feet. Time was running out. Debate flared between them, each argument sharp and urgent. Jax insisted the device could be the key to understanding the planet's disappearance, maybe even reversing it. Ellara countered that the risk was too great, that tampering with something so volatile could doom them all. The station shuddered again, a deafening crack echoing through the corridors. The decision was made for them. They grabbed what data they could and fled, the station collapsing behind them in a cascade of sparks and debris. Back on the Ethereal, Ellara stared at the fragments of data they'd salvaged, her mind racing. The logs hinted at something darker, a deliberate act, not an accident. The implications were staggering. If the planet's disappearance had been engineered, then whoever, or whatever, was behind it had power beyond comprehension. And now, that same power was leaking into the universe, unstable and unchecked. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of what they discovered settling over them like a shadow. As the ship drifted away from the wreckage, Ellara couldn't shake the feeling that they'd stumbled into something far bigger than they'd ever imagined. The signal from the vanished planet wasn't just a call from the past. It was a warning, and somewhere out there, in the vast, uncharted reaches of space, something was waiting. The dim glow of the Ethereal's control room cast long shadows as Ellara and Jax pored over the salvaged data. The fragments were chaotic, a jumble of equations, diagrams, and fragmented logs, but slowly, a horrifying picture began to emerge. The vanished planet hadn't simply disappeared, it had been consumed. The logs spoke of a phenomenon called the Aether, a force so incomprehensible it didn't just destroy matter, it erased it from existence entirely. The device they'd found on the station wasn't just a piece of technology, it was a desperate attempt to control the Aether, but something had gone terribly wrong. The logs described a catastrophic failure, a surge of energy that had torn the planet apart, leaving nothing behind but echoes in the void. Elara's hands trembled as she traced the equations on the screen, her mind racing. The Aether wasn't just a force of destruction, it was a gateway, a key to bending the very fabric of reality. If they could harness it, control it, the possibilities were endless. Faster travel between stars, the ability to manipulate time and space itself. It was the kind of discovery that could redefine humanity's place in the universe. And for Ellara, it was more than that. It was a chance to erase her past failures, to prove that she was still the brilliant scientist she'd once been. Her voice was low, almost reverent, as she turned to Jax. "Do you understand what this means? We could change everything." Jax's expression was hard, his arms crossed as he leaned against the console. "What I understand is that this thing wiped out an entire planet, and now you're talking about playing with it like it's some kind of toy. Do you even hear yourself?" His tone was sharp, the anger barely masked. "You're so desperate to fix your reputation that you're willing to risk all of our lives. What happens if it goes wrong again? What happens if we end up like them, erased, like we never existed?" The tension between them crackled like static, thickening the air in the cramped control room. Kira, who had been silently observing from the doorway, stepped forward, her usual calm demeanor giving way to unease. "He's not wrong, Ellara," she said, her voice steady but firm. "This isn't just about you. We're all on this ship, and if you're going to make decisions that could get us killed, we deserve a say." Her words hung in the air, a challenge that Ellara couldn't ignore. But Elara's obsession had already taken root, her mind racing with possibilities. She barely heard their warnings, her focus locked on the data, on the potential. "We're so close," she murmured, more to herself than to them. "If we can just figure out how to stabilize the ether, we could stabilize it." Jax cut her off, his voice rising. "You're talking about something that doesn't follow the rules we know. You're talking about playing God, and you know what happens when people play God. Things go wrong, really, really wrong." The argument spilled out into the corridors, the crew overhearing snippets as they passed. Whispers spread like wildfire, doubts creeping into every corner of the ship. Morale, already fragile from the nebula's effects, began to crumble. Kira found herself caught between loyalty to Ellara and her growing concern for the crew. She knew what it was like to follow a leader blindly, to trust someone only to be betrayed, and as she watched Elara's determination harden into something almost manic, she couldn't shake the feeling that history was repeating itself. The divide grew deeper with each passing hour. Ellara buried herself in the data, her obsession consuming her. Jax, meanwhile, began quietly working on contingency plans, his trust in Ellara eroding with every reckless decision she made. Kira found herself at a crossroads, torn between the mission and the people she'd come to care about. The Ethereal was no longer just a ship. It was a powder keg, and the spark was already lit. Somewhere in the void, the Aether pulsed, a silent, unseen force waiting to be unleashed. And as the crew's unity fractured, the question loomed larger than ever. Were they chasing a miracle or hurtling toward their own destruction? The Ethereal drifted closer to the coordinates, the crew holding their breath as the void ahead came into view. But it wasn't empty space. It was a churning mass of darkness, a swirling abyss that seemed to defy the very laws of physics. The Aether pulsed like a living thing, its edges writhing with tendrils of black energy that devoured the light around it. Ellara leaned forward, her eyes locked on the view screen. "This is it," she whispered, her voice a mix of awe and trepidation. "The source of the signal, the key to everything." With a sharp command, She ordered the crew to deploy probes, hoping to gather data from the edges of the Aether. The small, unmanned devices shot forward, their sensors primed to record every detail. But the moment they crossed into the Aether's boundary, they were gone, swallowed whole, their signals vanishing as if they'd never existed. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of what they were facing settling over them like a suffocating blanket. Jax broke the silence, his voice tight with frustration. "This is suicide. We need to turn back before it's too late." Elara's jaw tightened, her determination hardening. "We didn't come this far to walk away empty-handed. If the probes can't get close enough, we'll have to go ourselves." The words hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. A manned shuttle. The risk was astronomical, but Elara's resolve was unshakable. Kira stepped forward, her usual calm demeanor cracking just enough to reveal the steel beneath. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady. "I've flown through worse. If anyone can get close enough, it's me." The shuttle launched, its engines humming as Kira guided it toward the edge of the Aether. The crew watched in tense silence, the tension on the Ethereal's bridge palpable. At first, everything seemed to go smoothly. Kira's voice crackled over the comms, her tone calm and focused as she relayed readings back to the ship. But as the shuttle neared the Aether, the systems began to fail. The lights flickered, the controls grew unresponsive, and the shuttle was pulled toward the void like a moth to a flame. Kira fought to regain control, her voice rising in panic as the Aether's tendrils reached out, inches from the shuttle's hull. Back on the Ethereal, Ellara shouted commands, her voice trembling with desperation. "Pull back, get her out of there." Jax's hands flew over the controls, his face pale as he worked to override the shuttle's systems. With a final, gut-wrenching effort, Kira managed to break free, the shuttle lurching away from the Aether's grasp. She returned to the Ethereal, shaken but alive, her hands still trembling as she stepped back onto the bridge. The near-death experience left the crew rattled, their trust in Elara's leadership eroding with every passing second. Jax's anger simmered just below the surface, his resentment boiling over. "This is madness," he muttered, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the tension. "You're willing to risk our lives for a theory, for a chance at glory. But what happens when one of us doesn't make it back? Are you going to keep pushing until we're all just gone?" Elara met his gaze, her expression unreadable. She didn't have an answer, and that silence spoke louder than any words. Kira, usually the voice of reason, stood quietly, her arms crossed as she processed what had just happened. The bond between the crew, already frayed from the Nebula's influence, was unraveling further, and in the shadows of the ship, Jax began to plot, his mind racing with plans of mutiny. The Ethereal was no longer a ship, united by a common goal. It was a fragile alliance on the brink of collapse, and the darkness ahead seemed to mirror the chaos brewing within. The air on the Ethereal grew heavier with each passing hour, the tension between Elara and Jax simmering just beneath the surface. It wasn't until Kira overheard Jax murmuring into the comms late one night that the fragile peace shattered. She found Elara in the control room, her face pale as she relayed what she'd heard. Jax wasn't just questioning Elara's leadership, he was planning to take over the ship. Elara's chest tightened, her hands clenching into fists as she stormed toward engineering, where Jax was working. The confrontation was inevitable, and when it came, it was explosive. Sabotage, Jax, really? Elara's voice cut through the hum of the ship's systems, sharp and accusatory. Jax spun around, a wrench in hand, his expression hardening as he met her gaze. If by sabotage you mean trying to keep us all alive, then yeah, call it whatever you want, he shot back, his tone dripping with sarcasm. You're so blinded by your obsession with this mission that you can't see you're leading us straight into a death trap. The argument escalated quickly, their voices rising over the noise of the ship. Elara accused him of undermining her authority, of putting the entire mission at risk. Jax fired back, his anger boiling over as he threw her past failures in her face. You think this is about trust? It's about survival. You're gambling with our lives, and I'm not going to stand by and let you get us all killed. The verbal sparring turned physical in an instant. Jax shoved her back, and Elara lunged forward, her hands gripping his shirt as they struggled. Kira burst into the room just as the fight threatened to spiral out of control, stepping between them with a sharp command. Enough, her voice was like a whip, cutting through the chaos. We're on the edge of the abyss, and you two are tearing each other apart. If you don't stop, we're all dead. The crew, drawn by the commotion, watched in silence as the confrontation played out. Some stood with Elara, loyal to her vision despite the risks. Others sided with Jax, their trust in her leadership eroded by the near disasters they'd already faced. The divide was clear, and it threatened to fracture the crew beyond repair. Elara, breathing heavily, stepped back, her eyes scanning the faces of her team. She knew she had to act fast, not just to save the mission, but to save them from themselves. Later, in the dim light of the control room, Elara laid out her plan. It was risky, bordering on reckless, but it was their only shot. Using the data from the derelict station, she proposed recalibrating the device they'd found to stabilize the Aether. It's the only way, she said, her voice steady but laced with urgency. If we can control it, even for a moment, we might be able to harness its power without destroying ourselves in the process. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, their skepticism palpable. Kira, ever the pragmatist, was the first to speak. You're asking us to trust you with something that could erase us from existence. How do we know this isn't just another gamble? Elara met her gaze, her expression resolute. You don't. But if we don't try, we'll never know what's out there. And I'd rather die chasing the truth than live in fear of the unknown. Her words hung in the air, a challenge and a plea. Slowly, the crew began to nod, their resistance wavering under the weight of her conviction. But the tension remained, a thread stretched to its breaking point. As they prepared for the final phase of the mission, the Ethereal felt less like a ship and more like a powder keg, its crew bracing for the spark that could ignite it all. The Aether loomed ahead, a churning void of infinite possibilities and infinite dangers, and somewhere in the chaos, Elara wondered if she could hold them together long enough to see it through. Elara and Jax stood shoulder to shoulder in the Ethereal's engineering bay, their hands moving over the alien device with a tense, reluctant coordination. The air between them was thick with unsaid words, their mutual distrust simmering just below the surface. Jax's jaw was clenched as he adjusted a series of delicate components, his movements precise but laced with frustration. "If we're going to do this, we need to be careful," he muttered, his voice low. "One wrong move, and this thing could tear a hole in space-time." Ellara, her focus locked on the device's core, nodded curtly. "Then don't make a wrong move," she replied, her tone clipped. The partnership was fragile, held together by necessity rather than trust, and it showed in every interaction. Meanwhile, Kira sat hunched over a terminal in the ship's quietest corner, her fingers flying across the screen as she decrypted fragments of the derelict station's logs. The data was fragmented, but one message stood out as stark, urgent warning buried deep within the files. Her breath hitched as she read it aloud to herself. "Disturbing the Aether will trigger a catastrophic chain reaction. Do not proceed." The words sent a chill down her spine. She hesitated for only a moment before calling the crew together, her voice steady but urgent. "We need to talk about this," she said, projecting the message onto the main screen. "If this is true, we're playing with fire." Elara's reaction was immediate and dismissive. "Fear-mongering," she snapped, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the message. This is exactly the kind of thing they'd planned to deter anyone from uncovering the truth. "We can't let paranoia dictate our actions." Kira, usually calm, stepped forward, her voice rising. "This isn't paranoia, Ellara. It's a warning. If we ignore it, we're risking everything. Not just the mission, but our lives." The crew exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of the warning settling over them like a storm cloud. Jax, silent until now, leaned against the console, his arms crossed. "Maybe it's time we listen to someone other than you," he said, his voice cold. Elara turned on him, her eyes blazing. "And what's your solution, Jax?" "Turn back, abandon everything we've worked for." He didn't flinch. "If it keeps us alive, yeah, that's exactly what we should do." The tension between them was palpable, a spark waiting to ignite. That night, as the ship's systems hummed softly in the background, Jax made his move. His hands moved quickly in the dim light of the engineering bay, his tools precise as he altered the device's circuitry. He didn't need to destroy it, just disable it enough to force Elara to reconsider. When he was done, he stepped back, his heart pounding. It was a gamble, but one he was willing to take. The sabotage was discovered the next morning. Elara's voice rang out across the ship, sharp and accusing. "Who did this?" she demanded, her eyes scanning the crew. Jax stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "I did," he admitted, his voice steady. "And I'd do it again, if it meant keeping us from making a mistake we can't come back from." Elara's face darkened, her voice trembling with anger. "You've committed treason, Jax. You've jeopardized everything." The crew erupted into chaos, voices overlapping as they argued over what to do. Some sided with Elara, their loyalty unwavering. Others backed Jax, their trust in Elara's leadership shaken to its core. Kira stood between them, her voice cutting through the noise. "This isn't helping. We need to figure out our next move before it's too late." But the divide was too deep, the fractures too wide. As the crew debated, the Aether began to shift. The once distant void seemed to pulse, its edges expanding as if alive. The Ethereal trembled, its systems flickering as the Aether's energy reached out, hungry and relentless. The crew scrambled to their stations, the urgency of the situation pushing aside their arguments for now. But the question remained, could they set aside their differences long enough to survive, or would their infighting doom them all? The Aether loomed closer, its dark tendrils curling toward the ship, and the mission, once a beacon of hope, felt more like a ticking time bomb. The Ethereal shuddered violently as the Aether's expansion surged, its dark tendrils curling closer to the ship, like the fingers of a predator, closing in. Alarms blared, their shrill tones cutting through the tension on the bridge. Ellara gripped the edge of her console, her knuckles white as she stared at the readings. "It's accelerating faster than we predicted," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "If we don't act now, it's going to consume us and maybe half the galaxy with us." Jax, standing across the room, crossed his arms, his expression hard. "Activating that device is a suicide mission. We don't even know if it'll work. For all we know, it'll make things worse." His voice was steady, but the flicker of fear in his eyes betrayed his calm exterior. "We need to cut our losses and get out of here while we still can." Kira stepped forward, her sharp gaze shifting between them. "Running won't solve anything," she said, her tone firm. "But blindly activating the device without a plan is just as reckless. What if we use it to create a barrier, just enough to hold the Aether back while we figure out how to escape?" Her words hung in the air, a fragile thread of hope in the chaos. Ellara hesitated, her mind racing. Kira's compromise was risky, but it was the only option that didn't end with them either fleeing in defeat or risking total annihilation. Reluctantly, she nodded. "We'll need everyone on board for this. Precision is key. One misstep, and the Aether could tear us apart." The crew moved quickly, their earlier divisions set aside in the face of the looming threat. Ellara and Jax worked side by side in the engineering bay, their hands moving in sync as they recalibrated the device. The tension between them was still palpable, but the urgency of the task forced them to focus. "You're sure about this?" Jax muttered, his eyes never leaving the controls. Elara's response was quiet but resolute. "No, but it's the best chance we've got." In the control room, Kira monitored the ship's systems, her voice calm as she directed the crew through the activation sequence. "Energy levels stable," she reported. "Prepare for Phase 1 in 3, 2, 1. The ship groaned as the device came online, its hum resonating through the hull. The Aether's advance slowed, its dark tendrils pressing against an invisible barrier. For a moment, it seemed like the plan might work, but the Aether wasn't done. As the barrier held, the void began to churn, its energy growing more erratic. The ship's systems flickered, the lights dimming as the Aether's power surged. "It's reacting to the barrier," Kira said, her voice rising. "We need to pull back now." Before anyone could react, the Aether erupted, a burst of energy tearing through the fabric of space-time. The Ethereal was thrown violently, the crew scrambling to hold on as the ship spun out of control. Outside, a rift began to form, a jagged tear in the void that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Elara's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the screen. What is that?" Jax, his voice tight with disbelief, answered before anyone else could. "A wormhole, the Aether's energy. It's created a wormhole." The implications were staggering. If they could stabilize it, it might offer a way out, or a way forward. But the rift was unstable, its edges crackling with dangerous energy. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of their next decision pressing down on them. Ellara took a deep breath, her mind racing. "We have two choices," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "We can try to stabilize the rift and use it to escape, or we can shut it down and risk the Aether consuming us." The crew's eyes locked on her, their faces a mix of fear and determination. For the first time, Ellara felt the weight of their trust, not as a leader, but as a member of a team. It was a fragile bond, but it was enough. As the crew worked together to stabilize the rift, the tension that had divided them began to ease. Jax's hands moved with precision, his earlier anger replaced by a quiet focus. Kira's calm directives guided them through the chaos, her steady presence a lifeline. And Ellara, watching them work, felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Maybe they could survive this. Maybe they could even find a way to harness the Aether's power without destroying themselves in the process. But as the rift stabilized, the Aether reacted again, its energy surging in unpredictable waves. The Ethereal was drawn toward the rift, its engines straining against the pull. The crew held on, their hands gripping the controls as the ship was pulled into the unknown. And as the rift closed behind them, the Aether's dark tendrils receded, leaving only the vast, uncharted expanse of space ahead. The Ethereal drifted in silence, the crew catching their breath as they processed what had just happened. They had survived, but where they were, or what lay ahead, was anyone's guess. The rift had taken them somewhere new, somewhere beyond the reach of the Aether, and as the stars stretched out before them, Ellara couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was far from over. The Aether was still out there, waiting, and so was the truth about the vanished planet. The Ethereal tumbled through the rift, its hull groaning under the strain of forces no ship was ever meant to endure. For a moment, everything was chaos: alarms blaring, lights flickering, the crew clinging to their stations as the ship was hurled through the void. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the turbulence ceased. The ship emerged into a space so vast and serene, it was almost disorienting. On the view screen, a planet loomed, its surface dotted with sprawling cities and lush green landscapes. Elara's breath caught in her throat. "That's impossible," she whispered. "It's the vanished planet. It's still here." The crew stared in stunned silence, their exhaustion momentarily forgotten. The planet wasn't just intact, it was thriving. Colonies of light dotted its surface, and the faint hum of communications filled the airwaves. Kira was the first to break the silence, her voice tinged with disbelief. "How is this possible? The planet was destroyed, we saw the logs, the evidence. This shouldn't exist." Elara's mind raced, her earlier theories crumbling as she pieced together the truth. "The Aether," she murmured, her voice rising with realization. "It's not a destructive force, it's a bridge, a connection between dimensions. The planet didn't vanish. It was pulled into this one." As the Ethereal approached the planet, the crew began picking up signals, broadcasts, transmissions, even fragments of music. The civilization below was alive and unaware of their world's disappearance from their original dimension. Jax, his skepticism momentarily overridden by awe, leaned closer to the screen. "They're normal," he said, his tone a mix of wonder and disbelief. "They've got no idea what happened to them, or that they're even missing." Elara's gaze remained fixed on the planet, her thoughts churning. This wasn't just a discovery, it was a revelation. The Aether wasn't a threat to be feared or controlled. It was a tool, a means to connect worlds that had been torn apart. But the moment of clarity was short-lived. The ship's systems began to flicker, a warning flashing on the console. The rift was unstable, its energy fluctuating wildly. Kira's voice cut through the tension. "We've got a problem. The rift's collapsing. If we don't go back soon, we'll be trapped here." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of the decision pressing down on them. Elara, her earlier resolve wavering, turned to face them. "This changes everything," she said, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "This isn't just about the Aether anymore. It's about what it can do. Not destroy, but unite. We have a chance to bridge worlds, to bring people together who have been separated for centuries. But if we leave now, we might never get another shot." Jax, his arms crossed, stepped forward, his expression hard. "You're talking about staying in a dimension we don't understand, with a rift that's about to collapse. That's not a plan, that's a death sentence." His voice was sharp, but beneath the anger was a flicker of fear. "We came here to find answers, not to play hero. We've got what we came for. Let's go home before it's too late." The tension between them was palpable, the divide in the crew widening once again. Kira, ever the mediator, stepped in. "We're running out of time," she said, her tone firm. "If we're going to make a decision, we need to make it now. But whatever we do it together." Her words were a challenge, a reminder that their survival depended on unity, not division. Elara glanced at the planet below, her mind racing. She had spent so long chasing redemption, seeking to prove herself through this mission. But now, faced with the possibility of something greater, she realized how small her ambitions had been. This wasn't about her. It was about the countless lives on both sides of the rift, lives that could be transformed by what they discovered. She took a deep breath, her voice softening. "You're right, Jax, this is dangerous. But isn't that why we're here? To take risks, to push boundaries. This isn't just about us anymore. It's about them." She gestured to the planet below, "and about everyone we left behind." The crew fell silent, the weight of her words settling over them. The rift flickered on the view screen, its energy waning. The decision loomed, a choice between safety and the unknown, between retreating to what they knew and stepping into a future they couldn't predict. As the Ethereal hovered on the edge of possibility, Elara couldn't help but wonder if this was the moment that would define them, not as individuals, but as a team. And somewhere, deep in the void, the Aether pulsed, its power waiting to be harnessed or squandered. The Ethereal descended toward the planet's surface, its landing gear extending with a soft hiss as it touched down in a clearing surrounded by towering, crystalline structures. The air outside shimmered faintly, a subtle reminder that this world operated under different rules. Elara led the crew out of the ship, her boots crunching on the alien soil. The atmosphere was thick with a strange, metallic tang, and the horizon glowed with hues of amber and violet. It was beautiful, but there was an undercurrent of tension, like stepping into a dream that could unravel at any moment. As they ventured further, the crew was greeted by a group of inhabitants, their forms ethereal and almost translucent. Their leader, a figure named Alien, stepped forward, his voice resonating with a calm authority. "You've crossed the rift," he said, his eyes scanning the crew with a mix of curiosity and caution. "Few from your dimension have ever done so. Tell us, what brings you here?" Ellara hesitated, her mind racing. She explained their journey, the signal they'd followed, and their discovery of the Aether. Alien listened intently, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "The Aether is not a force to be trifled with," he said. "It was used to hide our world, to protect it from a threat that sought to consume us. We chose isolation to preserve what we have built, but now, your presence here risks exposing us once more." The revelation struck Ellara like a thunderbolt. The vanished planet hadn't been destroyed. It had been hidden, shielded by the Aether to escape a danger that still lurked in their own dimension. She felt a surge of curiosity, a scientist in her desperate to learn more. But as she pressed Alien for details, his tone grew firm. "We cannot share the secrets of the Aether. To do so would endanger not only us but your world as well." Jax, standing a few paces behind Ellara, crossed his arms, his skepticism evident. "Sounds like a convenient excuse to keep us in the dark," he muttered, his voice low. "If they've got the knowledge to control the Aether, why not use it to stop whatever's out there? Why hide and let the rest of us fend for ourselves?" His words hung in the air, a challenge that neither Ellara nor Alien could ignore. As the crew explored the city, they marveled at the advanced technology and the seamless integration of the Aether into daily life. It was clear that the inhabitants had mastered its use in ways that defied comprehension. Elara's curiosity burned brighter with every discovery, her mind racing with possibilities. She began to covertly record data, her actions driven by a mix of ambition and the belief that this knowledge could save her own world. But every time she activated her device, she felt a pang of guilt. Alien's warning echoed in her mind, a reminder of the trust she was betraying. Kira, ever observant, caught Ellara in the act. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice sharp with concern. "This isn't just about us anymore. If they find out," Ellara cut her off, her tone defensive. "We can't just walk away from this. Think of what we could do with this knowledge, what we could prevent." Kira's expression softened, but her words were firm. "You're risking everything, and not just for us, for them." Meanwhile, Jax grew increasingly restless. "We've overstayed our welcome," he said, his voice tense. "The rift's unstable, and if it closes, we're stuck here. I don't know about you, but I'm not keen on spending the rest of my life in someone else's dimension." His words resonated with the crew, who were already on edge. The rift's instability was becoming more apparent, its energy flickering like a dying flame. As the tension reached a boiling point, Alien approached Ellara, his gaze piercing. "You've taken something that doesn't belong to you," he said, his voice calm but laced with disappointment. "The Aether is not a tool for conquest or control. It is a responsibility, one you are not ready to bear." Elara's heart sank, her earlier confidence crumbling. She wanted to argue, to explain that her intentions were noble, but the weight of his words silenced her. The rift began to destabilize further, its energy crackling with dangerous intensity. The crew scrambled back to the Ethereal, their earlier awe replaced by urgency. As the ship lifted off, Alara glanced back at the planet, her mind torn between the promise of discovery and the cost of her actions. The rift loomed ahead, its edges fraying as it threatened to collapse. The crew held their breath, the fate of their mission, and perhaps their world hanging in the balance. And as the Ethereal shot through the rift, Alara couldn't shake the feeling that they were leaving more than just a planet behind. They were leaving a choice, one that could shape the future of both dimensions. The Ethereal hurtled through the rift, its engines straining as the unstable energy behind them began to collapse. The crew could feel the tension in the air, a palpable weight that pressed down on them as they emerged back into their own dimension. But the relief of returning to familiar space was short-lived. On the view screen, a massive, jagged tear began to form, a breach in the rift that no one had anticipated. From it poured a swarm of ships, their dark, angular designs unmistakable. Elara's heart sank as she recognized them. "The hostile force from our dimension," she said, her voice tight with dread. "They've found a way through." The ships moved with terrifying precision, their weapons trained on the planet beyond the rift. Elara's stomach churned as she realized the gravity of the situation. Her actions, her desperate need to uncover the secrets of the Aether, had inadvertently given the hostile force the means to breach the alternate dimension. The guilt hit her like a tidal wave, but there was no time to dwell on it. The hostile ships were already advancing, their intent clear: to invade and conquer the world they had just left. Kira's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and urgent. "We can't let them reach the planet. If they get through, both dimensions are at risk." Elara nodded, her mind racing. She knew what had to be done. "We need to seal the rift," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of the words. "But to do that, we'll have to use the Ethereal as a conduit. It's the only way to generate enough energy to close it permanently." The implication hung in the air, unspoken but understood. Using the ship as a conduit would mean sacrificing it, and possibly everyone on board. Jax was the first to react, his voice rising with anger. "You're talking about blowing us up. After everything we've been through, that's your solution?" His fists clenched at his sides, his frustration boiling over. "You've been chasing this mission like it's the only thing that matters, and now you want us to die for it." Elara met his gaze, her expression a mix of determination and regret. "I didn't want this," she said quietly, "but if we don't act, both dimensions will be destroyed. This isn't just about us anymore." The crew erupted into heated debate, their voices overlapping as they argued over the plan. Some, like Kira, understood the necessity of the sacrifice. "If we don't do this, it's not just our lives on the line," she said, her tone firm. "It's everyone, on both sides of the rift." Others, like Jax, refused to accept it. "There has to be another way," he insisted, his voice cracking with desperation. "We can't just give up, not like this." Elara felt the weight of their distrust, the guilt of her past mistakes pressing down on her. She had spent so long trying to prove herself, to redeem her failures, and now she was faced with the ultimate test of leadership. Her decision would define not just the mission, but her legacy. She took a deep breath, her voice cutting through the chaos. "I know this isn't fair," she said, her tone steady but laced with emotion. "But if we don't act, we'll lose everything. I'm asking you to trust me one last time." The hostile force was closing in, their weapons charging as they prepared to fire. The Ethereal was outnumbered and outgunned, its hull groaning under the strain of the rift's energy. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of the decision pressing down on them. Slowly, reluctantly, they began to prepare for the final stand. Jax, his anger still simmering, moved to the engineering bay to recalibrate the ship's systems. Kira took her place at the helm, her hands steady on the controls, and Ellara, standing at the center of the bridge, watched as the hostile ships drew closer, their weapons glowing with deadly intent. As the crew worked together to position the Ethereal at the heart of the rift, Ellara felt a strange sense of clarity. This wasn't just about redemption anymore. It was about responsibility, about doing what had to be done, no matter the cost. The hostile force was almost upon them, their weapons locking onto the ship. Elara's hand hovered over the console, her heart pounding as she prepared to initiate the final sequence. "This is it," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "Whatever happens next, we did this together." The ethereal system surged as the energy from the rift began to flow through it, the ship's hull glowing with an otherworldly light. The hostile force opened fire, their weapons striking the ship with devastating force, but it was too late. The ethereal had become the key to sealing the rift, its energy merging with the Aether in a blinding burst of light. As the rift began to collapse, the hostile ships were pulled into the void, their screams of defiance lost in the chaos. And then, silence. The rift was gone, the ethereal with it. In its place, a fragile piece stretched across the stars. Ellara, her vision blurring as the ship disintegrated around her, felt a strange sense of calm. She had made the ultimate sacrifice not for glory, not for redemption, but for the lives of countless others. And as the light consumed her, she knew that her legacy would be defined not by her failures, but by the choice she made in the end. The ethereal shook violently as the hostile force unleashed a barrage of firepower, their weapons tearing through the ship's weakened hull. Alarms blared, their shrill tones echoing through the corridors as the crew scrambled to hold the line. Kira, her hands steady on the controls, maneuvered the ship with desperate precision, dodging incoming fire. "We can't take much more of this," she shouted, her voice barely audible over the chaos. Jax, his face streaked with sweat, worked furiously in the engineering bay, rerouting power to the ship's failing shields. "I'm doing what I can," he snapped, his tone sharp but laced with urgency. "But we're running out of time." Ellara, standing at the heart of the bridge, felt the weight of every second. The Aether device pulsed with energy, its core glowing brighter as the rift's instability grew. She knew what had to be done. "We need to trigger a feedback loop," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "It's the only way to seal the rift permanently. But it'll consume the ship, and anyone still on board." The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, the reality of the situation sinking in. There was no time for debate, no room for hesitation. The hostile force was closing in, their weapons charging for another devastating strike. Kira was the first to act, her tone calm but resolute. Evacuation protocols are ready. Everyone to the escape pods now. The crew moved quickly, their movements sharp with purpose as they abandoned their stations. Jax, however, hesitated, his gaze locked on Ellara. "You're not staying behind," he said, his voice firm. "Not alone." Ellara shook her head, her expression softening but unwavering. "Someone has to activate the device. If I don't, the rift won't seal. This is the only way." The ship trembled again, a deafening crash resonating through the hull as another blast struck. Jax stepped closer, his voice rising above the chaos. "I'm not leaving you, not again." The words carried a weight that went beyond the moment, a reflection of the guilt and resentment that had divided them for so long. Elara's eyes met his, and for the first time, she saw not anger, but resolve. Together, they turned to the Aether device, their hands moving in unison as they completed the final adjustments. The feedback loop activated with a blinding surge of light, the Aether's energy surging through the ship. The hostile force recoiled, their ships caught in the growing maelstrom as the rift began to collapse. The Ethereal groaned under the strain, its hull buckling as the Aether consumed it. Kira's voice crackled over the comms, her tone urgent. "Ellara, Jax, get to the pods. There's no time left." But neither moved. They stood together, their focus locked on the device, ensuring the rift sealed completely. As the ship disintegrated around them, Ellara turned to Jax, her voice soft but steady. "I'm sorry," she said, the words carrying the weight of everything left unspoken. Jax shook his head, his expression softening. "We did what we had to do. That's all that matters now." The Aether's light enveloped them, its energy warm and strangely peaceful. In their final moments, the grievances of the past faded, replaced by a quiet understanding. They had come together not as adversaries, but as allies, united by a shared purpose and a final act of sacrifice. The rift sealed with a burst of energy, the hostile force vanishing into the void. The Ethereal was gone, its sacrifice ensuring the safety of both dimensions. In the silence that followed, the escape pods drifted through the stars, their occupants reflecting on the cost of their mission. And somewhere, in the vast expanse of space, the Aether pulsed faintly, a reminder of the fragile balance they had fought to preserve. The crew had lost much, but in their final act, they had found something far greater: unity, redemption, and the courage to face the unknown. The escape pods drifted silently through the void, their dim emergency lights flickering as the Aether's energy faded into the vast emptiness of space. Inside, the crew sat in stunned silence, the reality of what they just endured sinking in. The Ethereal was gone, and with it, Ellara and Jax. There were no words, no gestures to ease the weight of their loss. Each member of the crew carried their grief in private, their faces reflecting the enormity of the sacrifices made. Hours passed like days, the pod systems slowly failing as power reserves dwindled. Just as hope began to fade, a faint signal appeared on the comms. A passing freighter, its trajectory bringing it within range. The crew sent out a distress call, their voices trembling with a mix of desperation and relief. The freighter responded, its crew moving quickly to retrieve the pods and bring the survivors aboard. Safe at last, the crew of the Ethereal found themselves among strangers, their story met with awe and disbelief. They were offered food, water, and a place to rest, but sleep brought little comfort. The faces of Ellara and Jax lingered in their dreams, their final moments replaying in vivid detail. The crew awoke to the sound of the freighter's engines, their journey back to Earth underway. Upon their return, the crew was greeted as heroes, their mission hailed as a groundbreaking discovery. The data they brought back from the alternate dimension was analyzed and cataloged, its implications reshaping humanity's understanding of the universe. But for the crew, the accolades felt hollow. They had returned with knowledge that could change the course of history, but the cost had been unimaginable. Ellara and Jax were gone, their absence a constant reminder of the price they had paid. Kira, now the de facto leader of the group, stepped forward to guide the mission's legacy. In a quiet ceremony, she addressed the crew and the scientists who had gathered to study their findings. "We've been given a gift," she said, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "But it's not ours to exploit. This knowledge comes with a responsibility, to use it wisely, to protect both our world and the one we left behind." Her words resonated deeply, a vow to honor the sacrifices made and to ensure their mission was not in vain. The crew, though forever changed by their experiences, found strength in their shared bond. They had faced the unknown together, and in doing so, had forged a connection that transcended the mission itself. Each carried the weight of what they'd lost, but they also carried the hope of what they'd gained, a deeper understanding of the universe and their place within it. As the years passed, the story of the vanished planet became a legend, told and retold across generations. It inspired countless explorers, scientists, and dreamers to push the boundaries of what was possible, to seek out the mysteries that lay hidden in the stars. The Ethereal and its crew became symbols of courage and sacrifice, their journey a testament to the power of unity and the enduring human spirit. Yet, for those who had lived through it, the story was more than a legend. It was a memory, a reminder of the choices they had made and the lives they had touched. And as they looked to the stars, they knew that somewhere, out in the infinite expanse, the Aether still pulsed, a silent witness to their journey and the legacy they had left behind. Months had passed since the Ethereal's final mission, and life had settled into an uneasy rhythm for Kira. She spent her days helping to analyze the data they'd brought back, but her nights were haunted by the faces of those they'd lost. It was during one of these restless nights that her comms device buzzed unexpectedly. The message was brief, its origin untraceable, just a string of coordinates and a single line of text: "They're not gone." Her heart skipped a beat. Could it be true? Could Ellara and Jax have somehow survived? The message set off a chain reaction in Kira's mind. She replayed their final moments on the Ethereal, the blinding light of the Aether, the way the ship had dissolved around them. It had seemed impossible that anyone could have made it out alive, but the coordinates were real, and they pointed to a remote sector of space, a place where the Aether's energy had left strange ripples in the fabric of reality. Determined to uncover the truth, Kira began assembling a new crew, each member carefully chosen for their skills and their ability to handle the unknown. The recruits were a mix of seasoned explorers and fresh faces, all drawn by the promise of uncovering the Aether's secrets. Among them was a brilliant but reclusive engineer named Tessa, who had spent years studying the Aether's effects on space-time, and a former mercenary named Dex, whose calm demeanor and sharp instincts made him a natural fit for the mission. Kira found herself slipping into the role of leader, a position she'd never sought but couldn't avoid. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders, and she couldn't help but wonder, was she stepping into Elara's shoes or carving out her own path? As the new ship, christened the Astra, prepared for launch, Kira briefed the crew on the mission. "We're heading into uncharted territory," she explained, her voice steady but laced with caution. "The Aether's energy has left anomalies in its wake, distortions in space, temporal echoes, things we don't fully understand, and we're not the only ones looking for answers. There are factions out there who will stop at nothing to control the Aether's power. Stay sharp and trust each other. We're in this together." The Astra lifted off with a roar, its sleek hull cutting through the atmosphere as it soared toward the stars. The journey would take them through regions of space where the Aether's energy had left its mark, places where time seemed to fold in on itself, where gravity behaved unpredictably, and where the very fabric of reality felt fragile. Kira stood on the bridge, her hands clasped behind her back, as she stared out at the vast expanse ahead. The coordinates from the message loomed large in her mind, a beacon of hope, or perhaps a trap. As the ship entered the first anomaly, the crew felt its effects immediately. The Astra shuddered, its systems flickering as the Aether's energy washed over it. Tessa worked furiously to stabilize the ship, her fingers flying across the console. "The readings are off the charts," she muttered, her voice tinged with awe. "It's like the Aether is overriding the rules of physics here." Kira nodded, her expression grim. "Stay focused. We don't know what else we'll find out here." Hours turned into days as the Astra navigated the anomalies. The crew encountered strange phenomena, ghostly echoes of ships long lost, fleeting glimpses of other dimensions, and fleeting whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. Each discovery brought them closer to the coordinates, but also deeper into the unknown. Kira found herself second-guessing her decisions, the weight of leadership pressing down on her. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was repeating Elara's mistakes, chasing a dream that might cost them everything. But every time doubt crept in, she reminded herself of the message: they're not gone. As the Astra approached the coordinates, the anomalies grew more intense. The ship's sensors picked up signs of another vessel, a small, derelict craft drifting at the edge of an Aether-ravaged sector. Kira's breath caught in her throat. Could it be Elara and Jax, or was it something else, something far more dangerous? She turned to the crew, her voice firm but tinged with unease. "Prepare for a boarding mission. We don't know what we'll find out there, so stay alert." The crew suited up, their movements tense with anticipation. As the airlock hissed open, Kira stepped into the void, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. The derelict ship loomed ahead, its hull scarred and pitted, a silent testament to the dangers of the Aether. Whatever, or whoever, was waiting inside, Kira knew it would change everything. The mission had already pushed them to their limits, and the hardest part was yet to come. As she floated toward the ship, She couldn't help but wonder, was she leading her crew to salvation or into the heart of the storm? The derelict ship loomed like a ghost in the void, its battered hull a silent testament to the battles it had endured. Kira and the crew moved cautiously, their suits' lights cutting through the darkness as they breached the airlock. Inside, the ship was a maze of shattered corridors and flickering consoles, the air thick with the faint hum of failing systems. As they pressed deeper, Kira's heart pounded with a mix of hope and dread. What if Ellara and Jax were here? What if they weren't? The first sign of life came in the form of a faint signal, a distress beacon buried deep within the ship's systems. Tessa, the engineer, worked quickly to trace its origin, her fingers flying across her portable console. "It's coming from the lower decks," she said, her voice tense with anticipation. Kira nodded, her grip tightening on the pulse rifle slung across her shoulder. "Stay close. We don't know what we're walking into." As they descended, the ship's condition worsened. Jagged metal and debris littered the floors, and the walls bore the scars of explosive impacts. The crew moved in silence, their footsteps echoing faintly in the eerie stillness. Then, as they rounded a corner, they found them, Ellara and Jax, huddled together in a makeshift cell, their faces gaunt but alive. Kira's breath caught in her throat. "We've got you," she said, her voice steady despite the relief flooding her veins. "Let's get you out of here." But their rescue wasn't going to be easy. The cell was sealed with a heavy, reinforced door, and the ship's systems were too damaged to override it. Dex, the former mercenary, stepped forward, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the tension in the air. "Stand back," he said, pulling a compact plasma cutter from his belt. The tool hissed to life, its bright blue flame slicing through the metal with precision. Within minutes, the door groaned open, and Ellara and Jax stumbled out, their movements stiff but determined. As they made their way back to the Astra, Kira couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The hostile force that had captured Ellara and Jax wasn't just a group of raiders. They were organized, methodical, and far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. Back on the Astra, the crew gathered in the briefing room, their faces a mix of exhaustion and determination. Ellara, her voice weak but resolute, spoke first. "They are not just after the Aether, they're trying to control it, to rewrite reality itself." Kira's mind raced. The implications were staggering. If the hostile force succeeded, the consequences would be catastrophic, not just for their dimension, but for every world connected by the Aether. She turned to the crew, her tone firm but empathetic. "We can't let them win, but we need a plan, one that plays to our strengths and keeps us ahead of them." The plan they devised was risky, but it was their only shot. The hostile force had established a hidden outpost near the site of the vanished planet, a heavily fortified facility where they were experimenting with the Aether's power. Kira proposed a stealth infiltration, using the Astra's advanced cloaking technology to bypass the outpost's defenses. "We'll need to move quickly and quietly," she said, her gaze sweeping the room. "This isn't just about rescuing Ellara and Jax anymore. It's about stopping them before they unleash something we can't control." The crew's skills were put to the test as they approached the outpost. Dex and Tessa worked together to disable the facility's surveillance systems, their movements precise and coordinated. Kira, Ellara and Jax led the infiltration team, their weapons drawn as they moved through the outpost's labyrinthine corridors. The tension was palpable, every shadow a potential threat, every sound a potential alarm. But the crew's unity was their greatest strength, their trust in each other, unwavering even in the face of overwhelming odds. As they reached the heart of the outpost, Kira came face to face with the leader of the hostile force, a figure shrouded in darkness, their voice cold and calculating. "You're too late," they said, their tone dripping with malice. "The Aether is already ours, and soon, so will be your world." Kira's resolve wavered for a moment, the weight of the threat pressing down on her. But then she thought of the crew, of the sacrifices they'd made, and the lives they were fighting to protect. She straightened, her voice steady and defiant. "You don't understand the Aether, and you don't understand us." The confrontation that followed was a blur of action and adrenaline. The crew fought with everything they had, their unity and determination, their greatest weapons. Kira faced the leader head-on, her pulse rifle blazing as she fought to disable the Aether device at the heart of the outpost. With a final, desperate effort, she succeeded, the device overloading in a burst of blinding light. The outpost began to collapse, its walls crumbling as the Aether's energy surged out of control. As the crew fled the facility, the Astra waiting just outside, Kira couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. They'd faced the impossible and come out the other side, but the battle wasn't over. Not yet. The Aether's power was still out there, waiting to be harnessed or destroyed. And as the Astra sped away from the collapsing outpost, Kira knew that their journey was far from over. The shadows of the past still loomed, but for the first time, she felt ready to face them, not as a leader, but as part of a team. Together, they would find a way to protect both dimensions, no matter the cost. The Astra hurtled through the void, its engines straining as the collapsing outpost receded behind them. Kira gripped the edge of her console, her knuckles white as she monitored the ship's systems. The hostile force wasn't giving up. Their ships were closing in, their weapons charging for another devastating strike. The crew scrambled to their stations, the tension on the bridge palpable. "We've got to outrun them," Dex muttered, his voice tight with urgency. "If they catch us, it's over." Kira nodded, her mind racing. They'd survived the outpost, but the battle was far from finished. In the chaos, Ellara stepped forward, her expression a mix of determination and unease. "I know how to stop them," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. The crew turned to her, their faces a mix of hope and skepticism. "I've learned how to control the Aether," she continued, her tone steady but laced with caution. "But it's not without risk. Using it comes at a cost I'm not sure we're ready to pay." The revelation sent a ripple through the crew. Tessa, the engineer, was the first to speak, her voice tinged with disbelief. "You're talking about wielding the Aether. After everything we've seen it do, that's not control, it's gambling with forces we don't understand." Jax, his arms crossed, nodded in agreement. "She's right. We've already seen what happens when the Aether gets out of hand. We can't afford to make the same mistakes again." Kira felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Elara's offer was tempting, a chance to turn the tide, to finally take control of the situation, but the risks were impossible to ignore. The Aether wasn't just a tool, It was a force of nature, unpredictable and dangerous. She turned to Ellara, her tone firm but empathetic. "What's the cost? If we use the Aether, what happens to us?" Ellara hesitated, her gaze falling to the floor. "It's not just about us," she said quietly. "The Aether connects dimensions. If we use it, we risk destabilizing the fabric of reality itself. It could tear apart everything we're trying to protect." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, the gravity of the situation sinking in. As the hostile force closed in, the crew faced a choice that would define not just their mission, but the future of both dimensions. Kira took a deep breath, her voice steady but laced with resolve. "This isn't just about survival anymore, it's about responsibility. We've got to decide, do we trust Ellara with this power, or do we destroy it once and for all?" The crew fell silent, the weight of the decision pressing down on them. Each member carried their own fears and doubts, but they also carried the hope of a brighter future. Dex stepped forward, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the tension in the room. "We've come this far together. Whatever we decide, we do it as a team." His words resonated deeply, a reminder of the unity that had carried them through the darkest moments. Tessa nodded, her expression softening. "He's right. We've got to trust each other, even when the stakes are this high." Elara's gaze swept the room, her tone resolute. "I won't make this decision alone. It's not just my life on the line, it's all of ours. But if we're going to stop them, we need to act fast." The hostile force was almost upon them, their weapons locking onto the Astra. The crew exchanged determined glances, their resolve hardening. They'd faced the impossible before, and they'd do it again together. As Kira prepared to give the order, the Astra's system surged, the Aether's energy pulsing through the ship like a living thing. The crew braced themselves, their hearts pounding as they stepped into the unknown. The stakes had never been higher, and the consequences of their choices would ripple across dimensions. Whatever happened next, they would face it as one, united by a shared purpose and the unshakable belief that they could protect what mattered most. The Astra shuddered as the hostile forces' ships closed in, their weapons charging with a menacing hum. The crew braced themselves, the tension on the bridge thick enough to cut with a knife. Kira's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding. "We've got one shot at this. If we're going to use the Aether, it has to be now." Ellara stepped forward, her face pale but resolute. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. "But it's going to take everything I've got. Once I start, there's no turning back." Jax's eyes narrowed, his fists clenching at his sides. "There has to be another way," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "We can't just throw you into the fire like this." Ellara met his gaze, her expression softening. "Sometimes, the only way out is through," she replied. "If I don't do this, they'll use the Aether to destroy everything we fought to protect. I won't let that happen." The crew exchanged uneasy glances, the gravity of the moment pressing down on them. Kira stepped forward, her tone firm but empathetic. "We're with you, Ellara. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." The words seemed to steady Ellara, her resolve hardening as she took her place at the heart of the ship. The Aether device pulsed with energy, its core glowing brighter as Ellara began to channel its power. The hostile force opened fire, their weapons striking the Astra with devastating force. But Ellara held firm, her hands moving with precision as she directed the Aether's energy. The ship's system surged, the Aether's power flooding through the Astra like a tidal wave. The hostile force recoiled, their ships caught in the growing maelstrom as the Aether's energy began to destabilize. Elara's voice crackled over the comms, her tone calm but laced with urgency. I'm going to seal the Aether permanently. It's the only way to ensure it can never be misused again. The crew's hearts sank as they realized what she meant. Elara wasn't just using the Aether, she was becoming one with it, sacrificing herself to protect the universe. The Aether's energy surged, its light enveloping the Astra as Elara's form began to dissolve. Jax's voice broke the silence, his tone raw with emotion. Elara, don't do this. We can find another way. But it was too late. Elara's final words echoed through the ship, soft but resolute. Take care of each other, and remember, this isn't the end. It's just the beginning. With a blinding burst of light, the Aether sealed itself, its energy dissipating into the void. The hostile force's ships were pulled into the collapsing rift, their screams of defiance lost in the chaos. The Astra was thrown violently, its hull groaning under the strain. But as the light faded, the crew found themselves drifting in silence, the hostile force gone, and the Aether's power sealed away. The bridge was quiet, the weight of Elara's sacrifice pressing heavily on the crew. Jax slumped into a chair, his face buried in his hands. Kira stood at the helm, her expression a mix of grief and determination. We'll honor her, she said, her voice steady but laced with emotion. Not just by remembering what she did, but by protecting what she gave her life to save. The crew nodded, their resolve hardening as they processed the loss. The Aether was gone, but the knowledge it had left behind remained a legacy that would guide them through the challenges ahead. The mysteries of the universe were far from solved, and the bonds they'd forged would be their greatest strength as they navigated the unknown. As the Astra drifted away from the site of the final battle, Kira couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Elara's sacrifice had given them a chance to explore, to discover, and to protect the fragile balance of the universe. And as the stars stretched out before them, Kira knew that their journey was far from over. The shadows of the past still loomed, but with the crew united, they were ready to face whatever came next. Together, they would honor Elara's legacy and continue the fight for a brighter future. The Astra descended through Earth's atmosphere, its sleek hull glinting in the sunlight as it touched down on the familiar soil of home. The crew stepped out to a hero's welcome, their names already etched into the annals of history. Crowds cheered, cameras flashed, and dignitaries praised their bravery. Yet, beneath the surface of their smiles, the weight of their sacrifices lingered like a shadow. They had returned victorious, but not unchanged. Each member carried the scars of their journey, some visible, others etched deep into their souls. Kira stood at the forefront, her posture steady but her eyes distant. The mantle of leadership now rested heavily on her shoulders, a burden she accepted with quiet determination. She knew their mission had been more than a quest for knowledge. It had been a reckoning. The Aether's power had taught them humility, a lesson she vowed never to forget. As she addressed the gathered crowd, her voice carried a mix of gratitude and resolve. "This isn't the end," she said, her words echoing across the packed square. "It's a reminder that the universe is vast, and our place within it is small. We must explore with respect, not ambition, with curiosity, not greed." Jax lingered at the edge of the celebration, his usual stoic demeanor softened by the memories of those he'd lost. He had fought alongside Ellara until the very end, and her absence left a void no accolade could fill. When the fanfare faded, he quietly slipped away, retreating to a small, secluded home by the sea. There, he found solace in the rhythm of the waves and the quiet whispers of the wind. It wasn't an escape, but a way to honor the lives that had shaped his own. In the stillness, he could almost hear their voices, urging him to find peace. The story of the vanished planet spread far and wide, becoming a cautionary tale for a generation. Scientists and philosophers debated its implications, while poets and storytellers wove its mysteries into myth. The Aether, once a symbol of limitless potential, was now a reminder of humanity's fragility. Its power had been both a gift and a curse, a force that had united worlds and torn them apart. As the crew reflected on their journey, they understood that their actions had set a precedent, one that would guide future explorers for generations to come. Kira, now at the helm of a new mission, gathered a fresh crew of idealists and dreamers. She spoke to them not as a commander, but as a mentor. "The stars are not ours to conquer," she said, her voice steady but warm. "They are ours to understand, to protect, and to cherish. Let's go forward with humility, knowing that every step we take shapes the destiny of not just our world, but countless others." Her words resonated deeply, a testament to the lessons learned from the Aether's mysteries. As the Astra prepared for its next voyage, the crew looked to the stars with a renewed sense of purpose. The vanished planet and the Aether's secrets had changed them irrevocably, but they were ready to face the unknown once more. The cosmos stretched before them, infinite and uncharted, a canvas waiting to be explored. They knew their journey was just one chapter in an endless saga, a story that would continue long after they were gone. And as the ship's engines roared to life, carrying them into the void, Kira allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The Aether's legacy would always be a part of them, a reminder of the delicate balance between discovery and responsibility. The stars called to them, not as conquerors, but as guardians. And together, they answered that call, ready to write the next chapter in the ever-unfolding story of the universe.